G'day guys, Testicles here. Kripparin just put out a video of his early access review of Path of Exile 2, and it's actually a really good video. Kripparin's someone that I respect quite a lot. He's, a very long-term player of Path of Exile 1 and has many achievements on that game. And I know with Path of Exile 2, he's been very much in the early development phases of it and everything like that. So here's some interesting thoughts. There's a lot that I agree with, but there's some that I disagree with as well, particularly sort of around the early to mid game content. So yeah, figured we'll sort of go through it together, and it's quite a long video, so I'm probably going to cut out bits and pieces that aren't really relevant. I will have a link in the description if you want to go and see the full video. All right, let's get into it.
From Path of Exile 2 and Ruthless is actually the dodge roll. The dodge roll seems to be something they've balanced the game around, and honestly, I don't like it that much. I don't like the dodge roll that much in general, and I don't like the fact that they're balancing the game around it. So what do I mean by how are they balancing the game around it? Well, in Path of Exile 1, if you want to really tank a character, you can make one. If you want to make a character that survives the highest damage ability in the game, you can do that. You're going to have crappy damage. It's going to have other disadvantages, but you can do that. In Path of Exile 2, you can't really do that. You can invest in as much health and as much survivability as possible, and you can get nearly one-tapped by a near max level map, granted. But like I did an expedition the other day, and I got killed in nearly one hit, something like 50 life with like 0.2 second reaction time, a tiny white bubble on the ground. The visual clarity and understanding the danger of the events you're facing is not good in Path of Exile 2, and combined with the fact that you almost can't survive anything unless you are looking at everything all the time and utilizing your dodge roll. Like, there are many boss mechanics that if you mistime your dodge roll, you will get one-shotted. And I do want to also mention...
So just that point there, and I guess overall in general, I personally like the dodge roll mechanic. I think it adds a lot more to Path of Exile. If I can pick a game with or without it, I'll definitely pick a game with it. Basically what he's saying though is because there is a dodge roll mechanic, you have to balance the game around that a little bit. So you can't sort of have it in Path of Exile 1 where it's, you can sort of build a character to be a tank, brick shithouse, and then also have a dodge roll mechanic, because the game would become completely easy mode. Then you would be able to dodge a lot of things, and anything you don't dodge doesn't really kill you anyway. And so you'd sort of just become a god, and that would be the sort of default build that everyone would go. So he's saying that because there is a dodge roll mechanic, they have to kind of tailor the game around that in a way where you can't be super tanky, and as a result, you kind of get one shot if you're not absolutely dodging everything on the screen, constantly paying full attention. Which in essence is true. So I do think that on a map level, when you've got mobs throwing things everywhere, you've got projectiles coming at you, obviously you can't dodge all that stuff straight away. And I do think that a lot of that will probably be nerfed a little bit on the monster side. So their damage overall will be less of a one-shot sort of bullshit thing. Game developers will commonly do this. This is the whole point of early access. You obviously no one can physically see everything coming at them and everything going on the screen constantly when there's 100 monsters on your screen. So I do think that will be dealt with. I do disagree though when it comes to bosses. I think at least in the early to mid game, and I know later on there are bosses which it's a little bit different in their skill checks, but I do think it's quite nice that bosses have one hit mechanics, and it's up to you and your skill to dodge that and you don't die, or they will bring you to a very close death. I think that's really good game design. I can 100% see that there will be people that can clear most of the bosses in Path of Exile 2 and not take a single point of damage, and they'll do perfected runs. That will 100% be a thing in the future, just because the boss design is so good. That said, there are some bosses, which I acknowledge, where they are a bit of a tank check or they're a little bit of a DPS check. And, that's pretty common in these sorts of games. It's just to sort of see whether your character's up to the standard that they think. There's certain abilities that you just cannot dodge, but they bring that later into the game. And I think that's fine. I think it's fine to have those at a overall level. None of the stuff instantly kills you anyway. But the one-shot abilities from bosses,
Start up the game. You're in the early game. The main thing that I dislike in the early game is gems and balance. I don't like their gem system more than I like Path of Exile 1's gem system, because you can't farm to get character power. In Path of Exile 1, if you're playing a character that maybe is just not so good in the early game, or maybe it's not so good in the mid game, what you can do is you can stay in a zone a little bit longer, kill a bunch more monsters, your gems will level up, and this will be like over leveling, and it'll make the content that you're about to do a little bit less challenging. It kind of has this forgiveness, and it allows Path of Exile 1 to have broadly very well balanced content, because, well, you're not forcing people into at this point you have to defeat that, which is a nice concept in general. But if it's too rigid, which in my opinion in Path of Exile 2 it is, because largely of their gem system, it doesn't feel very good. In Path of Exile 2, if you're facing a boss and the boss is too hard, your options are basically to farm a zone for hours and hours and hours, and you'll get 2%, maybe 10% character power if you get an item upgrade, because getting another couple levels, it's not giving you that much power. The passive tree, there's not that much power there. Your gems, you literally can't level them. The way that gems...
So this starting comment I do agree with. I think gems... So basically, if you don't know, and I mean, he's kind of explained it there, but I'll just give my overview as well. Gems, you'll find a uncut gem that's level 5, and you might have a skill that's level 3. And so you can either choose to make one of your previous skills that you're using a level 5, or there may be a new skill, a few skills that you can select from that are the new skills that are a base level 5 that you can also pick from. Where in Path of Exile 1, you would have gems that you find, and they have their own XP. So as you're playing along through the game, your character's getting XP, but so are your gems. All your gems are individually getting XP, and they're getting their own levels, which is really big for spellcasters, probably more so than anything that's physical based. Spellcasters, each gem level is absolutely massive, because that's what their damage scales off. Where in Path of Exile, or in actually both the games, physical ones kind of multiply what your base weapon's doing, and it's only by a small amount. So, a couple of gem levels with your physical gems, it's nice, but it's not game-breaking. When it comes to spells, and I can see that he's playing a minion build, it's a lot more cruel. The spell is your damage. You'll notice if you're using a spellcaster, the wand doesn't have any physical damage, any magic damage on it or anything like that. It's purely the level of your spell and what your armors and passive tree are doing, where your damage is coming from. So levels are kind of everything. And if you don't find one of those uncut gems to level up your previous abilities, it can become a nightmare. So I agree with that. I think they need to change.
To work is the level of a gem drops from a level of a zone. So if you can't beat a boss in the campaign, you can't increase the level of your gems. The best you can do is match the level of the gems of that zone, which usually, again, doesn't give you that much character power if your main gem is already of that level. So it gets a little bit tricky, because they're kind of setting themselves up for a real challenge in finding some sort of balance to this, because not every class is going to be pretty balanced in every single stage of the game, especially the early game. In my opinion, Path of Exile 1's gem system is amazing. I think it's the best skill system in an ARPG. I think it's a 10 out of 10 in terms of mechanics. It can look a little bit daunting, but in Path of Exile 2, it is a little bit more polished of a system. It looks a little bit less daunting, but it's actually not, because the core mechanics and the scaling and the optimal setups are still going to be like Giga Theory crafted. It's not really any simpler in that sense. It might be a little bit simpler for the player that doesn't want to look literally anything up and just wants to dive into the game. I don't know how many players like that there are these days. Maybe there's quite a few, maybe there's not. I don't know. Maybe that's something that they're keeping in mind. But overall, the core idea that you can't get power from gems is really kind of weak, in my opinion. And I also think that it's really lame that it's trivialized with trading. So if you're playing.
So the second part I disagree with. Path of Exile 1 gem system, it's very unique. It's like it's a very unique Path of Exile system. They completely reinvented the wheel when it comes to skill gems and everything. And in Path of Exile 1, it suits that game very well. It is a good system. It's not a bad system. It's very unique. It's very cool. But one of the things with that system is I can pick a class. I can pick any class, and I'm not going to get into the finer details and everything like that. But I could pick, I don't know, a marauder, right, or a bow class or something like that. I could pick ranger, and due to the way the skill gems work, I can play builds that aren't ranger focused. Like I could pick the class ranger, but then I may use melee weapons for the attack speed or doing some sort of spectral throw thing where you're kind of throwing your weapons and everything like that. And there's a lot of classes where it kind of gets very sort of intertwined and confusing. Now, it works for Path of Exile 1 because it brings in a lot of build diversity. Their selling point for it is every single person's character will be kind of unique to their own unless you're following a guide to a T. And even then, most of the equipment you find is going to be different to that guide. And so you are going to have differences no matter what. And that is completely true. But when you're a new person trying to play the game, it's extremely hard. Like, even, I had friends who tried to get into Path of Exile 1, and even the times where I wasn't playing it for long periods of time and I tried to get into it again, it's really, really hard to even pick up a guide and follow it and go, oh yeah, like I'll just copy this person's guide who knows what they're doing in Path of Exile 1 and I'll play that. And I think a lot of these guys like Krip who sort of have a lot of hours into the game and a lot of it's just kind of in their mind and it doesn't seem that complex, they don't realize where if people's entire life isn't, the game like Path of Exile 1 and they haven't done an entire fucking university bachelor's degree on it, a lot of it doesn't really make sense and it's kind of confusing. It also, I think, takes away a lot of the RPG element. Like, if I go into a game and I pick Ranger, as a new player, my thought is, oh, I want to play a bow build. In the Path of Exile 2, that division is very clear because the skill gems are tied to the weapon you're using, and you can change different weapons for different classes, but it's kind of pretty locked in. When I pick a Ranger, I start off with a bow. I'm pretty inclined to just pick other bows that are on the ground, and my skill gems are bow-orientated things that I select, right? It's a pretty easy concept to understand, and I quite like that. That gives me the real RPG element of I'm a ranger, I'm playing a range build with a bow and arrow. That's exactly what I wanted when I went into the game. With Path of Exile 1, when you're looking up builds and you may say, oh, I want to play a ranger or something, and you start looking up builds, there's all sorts of intertwined things, like, and again, this may not be factual. I don't know all the builds that are out there at the moment, but you may pick ranger and there could be totems. There could be a trapping ranger. There could be, your traditional ones with bows. It's very kind of intertwined. You can start off in one part of the passive tree and end up over here, which goes into another class's passive tree. And, all it is in that game is a starting point for the passive tree and kind of some of the skill gems that the vendors will give you along the way. And that's it. So you kind of lose a bit of that RPG element. I do agree with the levels with skill gems in Path of Exile 2, though. I think for me, what would have been a good system, and the good thing is I think they could easily rework this, is if they kind of looked at like the old school skill talent trees, right? Where your main skills have levels. So say I'm playing Ranger and I'm doing Lightning Arrow, and as I'm getting XP for my character, it's got the Path of Exile 1 system where my skill gems that I have activated on my character are also getting XP, right? Good. They're leveling up. And then as I hit certain leveling thresholds, that skill gem has its own sort of skill talent tree, which are your support gems. So if I want to go into split arrow, maybe I'll put in 5 levels into split arrow. And then that opens up another 2 branches or whatever underneath split arrow. And it kind of starts to define certain skill trees depending on what you've picked. The cool thing with that would be that you can do the grinding like Krip's talking about, where you can grind a few more levels on a map, particularly if you're magic orientated, you're going to be able to get those extra skill gem levels. But it'll also create a lot more build diversity than what there is in Path of Exile 2 at the moment. Mm-hmm. One of my characters is Lightning Ranger. I just saw Rax put up a YouTube earlier today where he's built out a Lightning Ranger and it's absolutely demolishing. And his passive tree looks pretty similar to me and he's using the exact same abilities as me. And I can guarantee there'll be 100,000 other people out there who have also picked Lightning Ranger, who also pretty much just use split arrow lightning shots with the totems, the lightning totems that kind of go down to make the chain effect and everything. And it's all pretty much the same. Yeah, we may have a few passive nodes that are different, but we all pretty much have the same build. Now, that's not a bad thing, but I think build diversity is nice. And I think if they went with a bit more of a leveling up skill gems and then leveling up supports, all those skill gems based on those levels and kind of going down a talent tree path like that, that would have been pretty nice. And I think it would kind of be like really good for everyone's thoughts.
In a trading environment, you do trivialize everything. You literally trivialize everything. You can be like, well, all these other players.
And basically this bit here is saying that you can just go on to trade and you can buy max level gems, because they're tied to the map. So at the moment he's running maps, he's getting max level gems coming out of his ass all over the place because that's what happens. Skill gems just keep dropping. And he can easily just put them up on trade. And then he has players message him all over the place going, oh yeah, I'll buy that skill gem. Easy way for him to make money. And it kind of makes a lot of lower level players completely bypass the issues that he experienced where he couldn't just buy these skill gems, but now everyone else is able to buy the skill gems. It's kind of a little bit of a dumb system. I agree with that.
Second one, you have to do like an ultimatum. An ultimatum is insane RNG. You can do the same ultimatum and it can be unbelievably easy. It's like just clearing white trash.
I'll quickly say with this, he's talking about ascendancy. First ascendancy is fine. As you get deeper in, there's other ascendancies that you can do, like Path of Exile 1. They've taken away Labyrinth, though. Labyrinth's no longer a thing. And it's kind of like ultimatum, sanctum sort of runs and things like that. And they're completely RNG based and they get very hard. And a lot of people aren't liking them. This has been identified, so I'm just going to skip past this a little bit. I don't think this will be on release. I think his thoughts are validated. I think Grinding Geek Games has also validated it, so we'll skip past it.
I think that will go a long way, so I'm not mentioning that as like a big downside here. But the mobs just have hitboxes that are too big. It's just kind of dumb that there's mobs that are native to some of these maps and they can't go over like a bridge. They can't go through an alley. They're literally too big for their own maps. You're going to see mobs getting snagged on like corners. They're like clipping. And your minions are doing the same thing. I don't have an example right now, but I've had many examples playing the game. It just feels kind of jank. It feels like with a game as polished as Path of Exile 2 is, you shouldn't be seeing this kind of crap in it.
I agree with that. One frustration I've constantly had is, you get surrounded by mobs and because they do sort of have a hitbox built into them, you get very locked. There's mobs where they intentionally by design will drag you across the map and try and slam you into a wall. But then you can have multiple mobs that are doing that. And, then all of a sudden you're locked into a wall, you can't move away, you can't get out of there. And all that can happen is you die. Likewise, you might be sort of running around, you hit like a little crevice, and then all of a sudden, you're never standing there killing things, you're constantly moving around. I'm constantly doing AoE things, killing mobs behind me and everything like that to be a little bit efficient. And that's just the way I like to play. and you will commonly hit points where you just get absolutely clowned on, and it feels like there's no way out. You just get trapped. Um, Path of Exile has acknowledged this. I am going to do a video after this going over their latest news posts. This is something they acknowledge, so I'm not too concerned. I don't think this is going to be on the release of the game. This is just an early accessing, I think. But yes, it is very valid what he's saying, and I think it's funny that there's monsters that are designed for look part of the in-game map that they're in, but they can't access all the areas because their design is too big. I think that is a serious oversight. It's amazing it didn't come up in the testing.
The thing is that if they make mobs hitboxes a lot smaller, it might actually trivialize the difficulty of the game in a lot of cases, so they might not do that. That will be a tough one for them to solve, in my opinion. It is kind of tied to the map size. One suggestion that I have is I would like to see at least the maps with bosses in them just generally be the boss, okay? I think it's kind of lame that in the maps that have bosses, yes, the boss is the challenge, but you still have to do like the entire map all over again. The bosses are pretty cool though, save for the fact that you have to use your dodge roll to avoid getting one-shotted in nearly all of them in the highest tier of maps. They are rewarding enough. If you are doing a map with a boss, it's going to give you like half the loot or more that you will get from that entire map. And that's actually kind of insane. One thing that you'll notice if you're going through maps is that you might not agree with some things. There's a game out there for everyone. They can't go through an alley. I think it's kind of that much. In Path of Exile 1, it goes up a whole lot. You can be map all over again. The bosses are pretty cool though. Say that entire map, and that's actually kind of insane. One thing that you'll notice if you're going through maps is that the mobs don't actually scale that much more HP.
I think that what he just said there is a positive to me personally. As I've mentioned before, I like that you have to dodge the boss mechanics, otherwise you get one hit. I think that is purely skill-based. I don't think it's skill-based when you're surrounded by mobs throwing things at you everywhere and you can't dodge all that. I agree with that. But I think when it comes to bosses, that is entirely skill-based. That's a very Souls-like decision. And I think that's perfectly fine, to be honest. That is a learning curve that a lot of people will learn eventually, and it will no longer be an issue. And then we'll all be sitting around saying that the bosses are too easy. We know how to dodge all their skill mechanics. It's built into our brains. We've fucking played it that many times that it's no longer challenging. We're not taking any damage, and the bosses are the easiest part of the maps. I guarantee that will happen eventually. So that isn't a concern for me. I do think that clearing the whole map though and all the minions every single time, like you were saying, is definitely a draw. It's
like, I don't know the exact numbers, but it feels like the health of monsters as you climb the rank tiers doesn't go up that much. In Path of Exile 1, it goes up a whole lot. You can be cruise controlling in the early maps and really struggling in even the mid-game maps in Path of Exile 1. In PoE 2, the mobs in the lowest level maps have similar HP to the highest level maps. I would say no more than times 10. And times 10 is not that much because the first two maps are actually kind of easy. So what's different? Well, they do way more damage. Like, the entire game seems to be trying to find life nodes, but they're not on the passive tree. That's how you further to try to chaos some of the other bad mods away. I just don't know. So I think the way that they flip the tier system is actually worse for mods. For like crafting and stuff, it kind of sucks that a lot of the crafting options that were so awesome in Path of Exile 1 are just pretty much gone in Path of Exile 2. But on one hand, that was a little bit overwhelming for new players. It was really difficult for new players to understand if an item was good, especially because they had to basically imagine how they could craft on top of it later. In Path of Exile 2, an item is generally good or it's not. It's like Ruthless in Path of Exile 1. And that's pretty good. One thing they've also done really well with...
Yeah, I really like the crafting system in Path of Exile 2. I understand that it doesn't have anywhere near the complexity that number 1 has. The thing with 1 is it runs that deep that there is people who have like channels dedicated to how they craft things, and there is websites where you can go to and pick, base gear types and roll orbs on them and sort of get an idea of how long it will take you to create this perfect piece of gear and all that sort of stuff. And the common player just doesn't care about that sort of stuff. They don't want to go through. I always just found it easy to just go onto the trade website and buy what I wanted because I didn't want to learn crafting and sit through all that sort of stuff. Path of Exile 2 is different. I haven't used trade at all yet. I won't until I hit endgame, and then once I determine that I need specific legendaries for my build. And so I just craft everything myself. I think it'd probably be nice to maybe have something like scouring orbs so that I could sort of reset bad mods, like if you have a really good base item, but you kind of flunk it a little bit, you can scour it, bring it back to a base item again and sort of try to add things to it or try to, kind of re-roll some of those modifiers a little bit. But, simpler is better as well. The more complexities you add, the more harder it gets for new players and learning in general.
The itemizations, the currencies in Path of Exile 2, I am currently engaging with all the currencies that I'm regularly finding. That's awesome. That's absolutely fantastic. Now, some of those currencies, they suck, but that's kind of how it is. There is pretty significant drop scarcity, but I would say that overall, their system of drop scarcity, the crafting options that you have, and generally progressing your characters through gear is really consistent. I think this system has gone through a huge number of revisions, and is actually pretty good. There are a few parts of the game with characters that I think have gone through maybe not enough revisions.
So for context, real quick, for those of you who haven't played Path of Exile 1 much, and apologies if you can hear the kids screaming in the background, it's wild at the moment. Path of Exile 1 is crazy. There is that many different sorts of orbs and everything. And, there's all different orb sets if you have a corrupted item. So a corrupted item is, gets complex, but basically when something's corrupted, you can no longer do anything to it. That is a corrupted state of an item. So you can kind of get crazy modifiers that you wouldn't usually be able to get if the item wasn't corrupted, but at the same time, you can brick an item because you can no longer do anything with it. And if it gets a bad roll because it's corrupted, well, sorry, too bad, right? But then there's currencies in Path of Exile 1 where you can, they're called tainted currencies. And so you can, use those to change the socket color of corrupted items and change this and that and everything like that. And then, when you kill in-game bosses, they have their own currencies that they drop. And there's just so many different sorts of orbs and currencies in the game. It gets very hard to understand, because the whole economy is built around that as well. It's very hard to understand, how much each of them equal and everything. This game, I can completely agree with what Kripparin said here. I have used all the currencies right from Act 1. The currencies I'm using because the gear scarcity is so good that you need to use the currencies to make them better. And then you're kind of getting a good amount of currency where you can sort of do that with a lot of different gear, but then at the same time, you'll find a really good drop sometimes. And I honestly think the gear system for me so far has been brilliant. And then when using that, at least through the campaign so far, as I said, I'm not as far as Krip, but when you get a significant upgrade, it feels like a significant upgrade. It may not be the best rolls and everything and that, but the game is built around that. It's not built around actual optimum builds like Path of Exile 1 is. So it feels good. I like it.
I think the spirit system is cool, but there's just no sense of balance there. I'm playing a summoner and I can spend for a max level an arsonist, which is one of the cheaper minions, 29 spirit for one, and that is 100 at low levels for one arsonist, huge amount. Or I can spend 30 at all levels for the maximum number of raging spirits to spawn basically as I'm regularly playing the game. This doesn't make any sense. It's like one of those situations where it doesn't seem to kind of go with one another. It's like they threw darts at a dartboard, and that's how much spirit an ability cost. There's just not much sense when you compare the abilities. Even the minions themselves, they're just like the storm mage has a higher cost than the fire arsonist guy. Why? It's not any stronger. I don't know. The brute costs a whole lot. Is the brute useful? No. The mobs are completely ignoring your minions and beelining the player. Why would I lose 2 mages for a brute? So I'm just not going to use the brute because it costs too much. So I think the spirit system needs some further revisions in terms of costs. I think it's quite off, and in some cases very off, but we'll see. Overall, I think it's a great game for like a campaign playthrough and early mapping. You're going to see a lot of build variety and diversity in that sense. Once you get to late game maps is where a lot of the problems start happening. And I think they imagine that, some of the top streamers of the game will just play that through anyway and kind of push that. That's possible, but I'm not sure. My predictions for Path of Exile 2 are as follows. I think the combination of a really tough campaign, especially for a lot of classes, and very limited high map tier viability will just kind of be draining for people who play this game all the time. For people that play this game, like people who play PoE 1 like year round, I think they will just find it like frustrating to play Path of Exile.
Definitely 2 different games. I mean, I kind of told right from the get-go that feels like Path of Exile 2 is intentionally designed to be almost the opposite of Path of Exile 1, while still having some of the appealing mechanics. I think if you're really involved in every season of Path of Exile 1, you're probably not going to like Path of Exile 2 too much, and that's fine. They're 2 different games. But all in all, I'll wrap the video up here. My own video has gone extremely long because I'm booking over another long video, so I'm going to try and cut it as short as possible. I will be coming out with my own early access review over the coming weeks. I do want to get further through the game before I do that so that I can give a real well thought out opinion. But at the moment, I'm really enjoying it. And but I am in the campaign phase, which he said is the best part of the game. So we'll see what happens. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.